This is The Collective Voice, and you're tuning in to Faith Transitions,
exploring the challenges and opportunities at the crossroads of ministry and innovation.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Collective Voice. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, and I'm just so grateful to have with me today Rudy Logan on our episode of Transitions. So if you remember, Transitions is a show that we have on The Collective Voice that really focuses on the ongoing transitional state of young adults. Through the research and conversations we've had with young adults, this is a theme that continues to emerge, that from the time folks graduate college, if they go to college, all the way up until, I don't know, we call young adult about to 35 or so, but in that period of life, there are just so many transitions that happen, and it feels almost like a constant state of flux and a constant state of transition. And so we regularly bring young adults onto this show on the podcast to just discuss what it means to be faithful in the midst of transitions and to maintain a sense of faith throughout these transitions. And so today we have Rudy Logan. And so Rudy is from Silver Spring, Maryland. He comes today bringing nearly a decade of experience in community engagement and ministry, including but not limited to public safety, prisons, racial equity, and social justice. Rudy's upbringing in his local Baptist church planted the seeds regarding his passion for community building and social witness. The faith of his mother inspired him to practice, quote, hope as a discipline as expressed in the work of Maryam Kaba, which I'm excited to talk about. Rudy earned his MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary, and his driving motivation is to help create a world where we maximize everyone's opportunity to flourish and live abundantly well. That's a great intro, great bio. You can actually find that bio on the 787 Collective website, because Rudy is also our associate for Congregational Innovation now. We brought on Rudy on the staff recently, and for those of you who are listeners, you remember Jade from podcast previous. Jade, as you know, with the last podcast we did on transition, it has transitioned out of this role, and Rudy has stepped in. And y'all actually knew each other, right, Rudy?
That's right. We actually attended Princeton Theological Seminary together. Also, I was in the same entering class as her husband, Michael Evans. So, shout out to Mike and Jade.
Love him, miss him. Yep. Yeah, so thrilled to have you. Like that's your formal bio. Again, you can find it at 787.org, 787collective.org/leadership. But that's the official website intro. Give us the intro that doesn't make the website. What's the things that you want to share with people that aren't in your written bio?
Sure. First, Phil, thanks for having me on. Hello, everyone. What's not in my written bio? My mother actually came to the U.S. from West Africa in the 80s. She came from a country most commonly known as Côte d'Ivoire. The English translation of that is Ivory Coast. She came here in the 80s. I think, her lived experience helps ground me in a deeply, internationalist perspective. We're, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, we're an inescapable network of mutuality. And that lens kind of guides how I navigate this world in my work. My father, on the other hand, he comes from Washington, D.C. He grew up in Northwest. Some people might know it as Uptown if you're from the area. And his parents both came from North Carolina. My grandfather came in the early mid-40s from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. And my grandmother in 1948, she came to D.C. with her sister, who was attending college, Bennett College, an historically Black college in Washington, D.C. What more to say? I feel, when this question comes up.
No, I think it's good. I think
races,
understanding roots of people is really important.
Yeah, and in my local Baptist church, actually, I think this is a really important story that really describes like my theological trajectory and my faith formation. But in Sunday school one day, when I was in middle school, the teacher told us to draw symbols on the wall that we identified with. One of those things I drew was this, X-Wing from Star Wars. It was Luke Skywalker's, vehicle choice.
Love the X-Wing. Yep.
Right. But another symbol that I drew actually was a Black Power fist. And, for me, it was really an innocent gesture. My parents weren't deeply political. I wasn't even, aware, at least in depth, to, what that symbol, really meant. And a week later, the Sunday school teacher came to me. Now, mind you, it's a multiracial congregation that reflects the demographics, of my hometown, Silver Spring, Maryland, one of the most diverse cities in the country. And my Sunday school teacher, beloved Sunday school teacher, she was, an older white woman. And she came to me a week later and she said that she had discussed, what I drew with a well-respected Black deacon in our church, also, beloved member of our church. And they both agreed that I should erase the symbol from the wall because they feared that it would cause division in the church. So, I'm like 11 or 12 years old and, I really just obliged, but it really marked the pattern, of different questions I had, feelings I had about, Christian faith, in relation to my own social location, that of my community, being this predominantly, Black and brown, working class community, and just wondering, like, what does the Christian faith have to say to our experiences, and I would take issue and question, these portraits of Jesus throughout the church, of this white man with these blue eyes, and you're just thinking about where Jesus was geographically, right?
Right.
Just having these questions, and it just really marked this pattern of my frustrations with the church and my questions not being addressed in ways that satisfied me. Then years later, at my alma mater, St. John's University, in undergrad, taking this course called Jesus and the Christian Faith in the theology department. And my professor, who also happened to be a white woman, she introduced me to Black Liberation Theology and the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folk, his book on religion, in which he wrote this short story actually called The Son of God. And in this work, Du Bois contextualizes the story of Jesus in the Jim Crow South. And a character named Joshua, who is a carpenter. He's out in the streets. He's preaching about, keeping your dignity, holding your ground amidst, the racism, this Jim Crow apartheid system that's going on. He's encouraging folks to hold strong. And he's hanging out with people who are considered outcasts and downtrodden. And he's transgressing these social boundaries, hanging with people he's not supposed to be hanging with, even across the color line. And he's eventually lynched, at the end of this story. And there's some, redemptive aspects to that, as well as people come to kind of realize who exactly he was, right? And what he was aiming to do. But I encourage you to check that out, yeah. W.E.B. Du Bois' book on religion. And also I was introduced to the work of James Cone in The Cross and Lynching Tree, right? That's drawing these parallels between the cross and, ancient Rome and the lynching tree in contemporary U.S., drawing those parallels between Jesus being persecuted and Black people being persecuted, and how they both, come to be perceived as these enemies of the state, right? And are punished for no good reason at all. So for me, these works brought me back to Christianity and articulated what I could not as a child, and provided me with the language that I didn't have to articulate how I really felt about my Christian faith as a Black person, in the United States. So that's what kind of, is a significant part of what foregrounds my faith in my theology.
I remember the first time I was introduced to Cone. I think it was in seminary at Perkins here, and same book, right? The Cross and Lynching Tree, and just being floored by it, like that. Growing up in rural Missouri, that was not conversations we were having,
right.
Probably very intentionally. And so at one point when I was doing young adult ministry in a local church context, I actually created a whole Lenten study on the Cross and the Lynching Tree. And it was 2020 actually. And so didn't end up getting to do it because the whole world fell apart. But still think there's a lot of great connections and overlaps there. So yeah, if Black Liberation Theology is something you've never heard of and you're listening to this, those are great places to start. Du Bois and Cone. Love that. So was that what helped propel you then to decide you wanted to go to seminary?
It was a big reason why, actually. And my theology professors they were such like a source of encouragement, and basically expressed to me like, hey, we see something here. Maybe this is something you want to think about doing further. And I never envisioned like doing graduate study in theology, but I was feeling sort of called to it given my experience in that class, and also at the same time I was doing an internship in the New York court system,
Hmm.
and I was tasked with reviewing youthful offender cases. And this is an area of work that's particularly dear to my heart. And I just saw case after case, and these black and brown kids really caught up in this class war, right? And really victims of racism and classism, right? That's dispossessed them and their communities, and has left them in a place of scarcity, right? Economic precarity, and like a number of these, like there's one case in particular that stands out to me, like about this kid who stole bread from the store, um, and he was criminalized for it. There was this conversation about incarceration that came up in regard to what he had done, right? He had done that out of survival. He wasn't being fed appropriately at home. His own family were caught up in cycles of generational trauma, victims of structural violence, organized abandonment, and all that. He was just trying to survive. And, at that point I was thinking, because I was interested in pursuing a legal career, because it just seemed like the appropriate thing to do, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
a lot of times, at least in my household, my mom would say like, be a doctor or a lawyer. So I'm thinking, okay, I guess, this is like the next step. But for me, in the place I was, I felt really drawn to faith and theology and what I could do personally, employing or using the tools of a Black liberation theology to respond to mass incarceration in the U.S., right?
Wow.
What would it look like to utilize Black theology in a way that addresses these underlying material conditions that fuel incarceration? How can we use this as a tool to reorganize life in a way that's more life-giving and doesn't subject these people to premature death because of the way that these structures of violence operate?
Which then, so that took you to seminary at Princeton Theological, and I assume that just trajectory just kept on because that's some of the work you went on to do then, right? After seminary, or were there other things in seminary that continued to form and shape you that really led you down the work that you went into after seminary?
I mean, there were certainly other things. My work doing prison ministry at Garden Youth State Correctional Facility in New Jersey, because I went in to form relationships with people on the inside,
Yeah.
and the stories that I heard only corroborated, what I knew about prison as a space that's really counterproductive,
Mm-hmm.
and is entangled with this concept of zip code destiny, how where you live determines
Yep.
your trajectory. And so many of the guys that I met in New Jersey State prison system, came from parts of New Jersey that experienced wealth disparities, in places like Camden and Trenton and so forth. So it really only gave me more drive, especially just being inspired, seeing what the folks in there were able to do despite the limited resources at their disposal, despite that inherently dehumanizing space that they were in, only further fueled me.
Wow. So you graduate seminary, another transition, right? So then is that when you moved back to the DC area, or did you stay
Right.
in Jersey for a while?
So right after seminary, I moved back to the DC area, something I didn't see happening. And I'm so thankful that I did. Um, Ended up working for this nonprofit called Impact Silver Spring, committed to advancing racial equity and social justice in Silver Spring, Maryland, suburb of Washington, D.C. And my work was centered around like food security, right, like public safety, like cultivating mutual aid networks, neighborhood connections, and so forth, policy advocacy. So some of the work I did there was to work with others to help remove school resource officers from public schools in Montgomery County in favor of greater mental health support, more culturally competent social workers in the schools to really, work with students, experiencing these behavioral, issues, and providing them with restorative alternatives to punishment. Also had the luxury of helping work in campaign for guaranteed basic income, which they have a pilot program now in Montgomery County.
Huh.
Yeah. Filming discussions and organizing different peer learning spaces for people to cultivate anti-racist practice in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Yeah.
But while I was working there, one of my colleagues was a member of Grace Episcopal Church in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they were part of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, or they are a part of the Diocese of Washington. And she had invited me to a racial justice ministry meeting that they held, where I actually met my predecessor, who's now a good friend of mine, Hazel Monet, who does awesome work around racial equity and social justice. And we just connected really over like the work of people like Maryam, Kaba, who you mentioned in my bio, basically abolition, anti-violence, work. So like I remained in contact with Hazel, and there was an opening, Missioner for Equity and Justice at the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, interim position. So I took that because I was really eager to be back in a space where I could be explicitly grounded, in my faith values as I pursue justice. And the core areas of the work of equity and justice at the diocese were and are reparations, creation care, refugee response, and then gun violence prevention is also a critical part of the work. And, going in there as an interim, there was like a 4-month period that was established, and I was to support the formation of this reparations symposium they had in the fall. And, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
We're so thankful for the different hands on deck to help make that happen. We made that happen. Kelly Brown Douglas came and gave the keynote speech. It was really cool after like reading her works throughout seminary and being inspired by her work, leaning on it for my papers, especially her work, Stand Your Ground, and then moderating the Q&A, between her and the audience was really cool. And we had a presenter, an historian at the diocese, presenting on the different work that the parishes had done, uncovering complicity that parishes were implicated in regarding anti-Black chattel slavery. In Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area, a number of the parishes continue to still do that work. And that's, great ongoing work that's going on in the policy and educational areas right now at the diocese.
So you mentioned Maryam Kaba and this term, hope as a discipline. Will you expound on that, what that looks like for you, both as you've emerged through your education and early years of ministry, but also where you find yourself now?
Hope as a discipline in the work of Maryam Kaba really encompasses like a set of daily practices, right, that make this hope material, make this hope real, right? Not only the belief, that it can happen, but the effort, the energy that goes into realizing these aims, right? And this is kind of to distinguish hope, from optimism, which you recently brought up, in discussion. Optimism can kind of be like this emotive kind of feeling, divorced from the material actions, but hope as a discipline, is grounded in that material action in conjunction with the belief, and the feeling. And for me, when I look back, retrospectively in my life, like I couldn't help but practice hope as a discipline. And I have my mother to thank for that, for sure. Because my mother was only able to go to, I don't want to put her on the spot.
Yeah.
But I think her life is such an inspiration. She was only able to go to 3rd grade. Because where she was attending school, she was beat by her teacher in the village that she had grown up in. And her father, my grandfather, took her out because he didn't want her to have to face that. That's the story my mother tells me.
Sure.
And because of that experience, my mother was so adamant about me and my brothers, and particularly me and my younger brother, here in the U.S., she was really passionate about us getting a quality education
Mm.
and did everything she could to ensure that we had tutors. She would put us in camps. She would put us in these different mixed, income spaces, and she just wanted us to experience it all and just have as much tools as we could have to navigate life successfully. So for me, even when I hated school, like it was never a thought that I wouldn't continue on because of my mother, right? Like even when I didn't believe, my mother believed. So she really, for me, like she is the example,
I
right,
love that.
of hope as a discipline that continues to guide me. Yeah.
Mama knows best, right?
Mm.
Mama knows best. Okay, let's shift a little and just so here you are. You're now working with us at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, um, associate for Congregational Innovation, working with the 787 Collective. Would love to, and that comes on the heels of another transition, right? So you've moved from the Northeast, now you're here in Austin. So would love for you just to kind of give a sense of how that transition has gone for you, and as you're getting acclimated here in Austin, but then also what kind of drew you to this idea of embracing the work of young adult ministry through 787 Collective?
Well, it's so funny that you said Northeast because I do consider the DC area the South. I know it's not the deeper South. Um,
That's fair.
but
Yeah.
especially after going to school in New York and New Jersey, it's like, okay, yeah, where I grew up is the South for sure.
I mean, again, I'm from Missouri, and sometimes it feels like that's the Northeast whenever you live in Texas as long, right? Like everything's just
Right.
up and over. But
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's been quite the transition. It's been an adjustment for sure. Coming here with my partner, she got a great job at UT Austin as a professor, kind of a dream job scenario for her. So how can you not support that?
Yeah.
Right? Especially in this job market. Here I am, here we are together. And for me, like, I never envisioned living in Texas, but I'm like genuinely enjoying it.
Good.
Like I love learning about the history of Austin. The more I learn, the more connected I feel. I really love the green spaces, simple things like food trucks being posted up at cafes. Like it's such a regular thing that I think is such, a neat idea. Even I tell you, like my family, like my paternal family's from the South, and there is something to be said about Southern hospitality in some ways. I know some people will say like it's surface level, but
Sure.
like I genuinely enjoy that, especially as I experienced it with my grandparents' family. So in some ways, it reminds me of home in
Sure.
that way. Also, I feel connected to those Southern roots, in my family. I feel like kind of home in that way. I think Austin has a lot to offer, and I think Austin, I mean, it tells a story of American history in my mind. I think before I came here, people were like, "Oh my gosh, Rudy, you going to a red state?" And I've been, in these different conversations about equity and justice, and the conversations are very similar from the ones we were having in the DC area. Right? Like Malcolm X said, America is Mississippi. I think there's something to that. There's a lot of great energy here as well. And I'm just taking it all in stride and genuinely enjoying my time here.
That's awesome. So one of the things we've talked about is how do we create similar experiences for young adults moving to Austin, right? Like kind of building a little bit off of what you're talking about of like just even looking at the racial history and just how that can be a way of what we use the term pilgrimage, right? Viewing this idea of a transition as a pilgrimage of sorts and being a pilgrim in your own city. So I know that's some of the work we've talked a lot about, that getting going on. What other things are you excited about as we enter into this work for 787?
You mentioned pilgrimage.
Yeah.
That's like at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Especially around place-based learning. I think already in the different, young adult ministry spaces I've been in, there seems to be some resonance pertaining to that in young adults and their young adult ministry leaders, like having an interest in immersing themselves in the communities that they're in and learning more about the place in a place like Austin. I mean, that can be such an invaluable experience in a place where gentrification has been happening, where in 1870, 36% of the population here was black, to now today, 7% of the population is black. Yet Austin is the fastest growing city in the US. So like, how did this all happen? What's going on? Why does the black population keep shrinking? I mentioned Black Austin tours, how they take people on tours, East Austin, downtown Austin, and so forth. And I took one through East Austin. Part of the tour is, we are guided through this experience, through the lens of the Austin City Master Plan in some ways. And this effort that, supposed to be, an effort of development, right, to help improve the city, but consequently ended up funneling so much of the black residents within the 6 mile, radius, on the east side. And we can see the implications of that today. And black residents who live in other parts of Austin, their amenities were cut off when they didn't move into the east side. Like their water was being cut off, their sewage system was not being taken care of, like in order to incentivize them going to the east side where they would be, provided these amenities. So these, dirty, cheap tactics that happen, all over the nation with these development efforts also happen right here in Austin. And I'm wondering what us as these transient young adults, living in Austin now can learn from that. And how can we honor the people who have lived here, for centuries, and how can we give back? I think so often we come to, we go to one city to the next as young adults, working to improve and, enhance our careers. And then we're on to the next thing. We see these cities as a stepping stone. Well, what would it look like to engage in a relationship of reciprocity with the land and the people that have inhabited it for so long?
It's taking me back to, so many of your answers just are so rooted in this sense of social justice and this work. And it's taking me back to this, what you say at the end of your official bio, right? Driven by motivation to help create a world where we maximize everyone's opportunity to flourish and live abundantly well. What do you think that looks like, given the state of the world, nation? Like, what does it look like to create that space to maximize flourishing and abundant living? I'm putting you on the spot right there, aren't I? That's a tough question.
Yeah, I'll try.
Sure.
In some of the conversations I've had, leading up to the election, after the election, I find in some ways that there's this deficit of moral imagination. And I don't mean to finger wag and like be on my high horse, because sometimes it's hard, but here I'm taking my cue from Kelly Brown Douglas and her book, Stand Your Ground. And she mentions moral imagination, being the absolute belief that we could change the world for the better, excuse me. And for me, like, this is something that I've been, wrestling with since my time in seminary, especially doing my community safety work, right? Because such an integral part of that is drawing on imagination. Like Angela Davis in her work, Our Prisons Obsolete, she mentions how, anti-Black chattel slavery was once thought as a permanent facet of our society, but the abolitionists dared to think and do otherwise, right? Yeah. So imagination is critical to us doing anything, to any sort of transformation that we wish to advance in our world, right? We have to dream it, we have to think it, right? And think beyond, the confines of our world, think beyond what is here before us in the here and now, and work toward building an alternative world, right? And to your question, a world where people's basic material and psychological needs are being met, a world where everybody has access to green spaces and parks and trails. Everybody can have food on the table. They don't have to worry when or where their next meal is going to come from. Everyone has access to quality transportation. Everybody should have the right to live in communities that are not environmentally burdened. Everybody should have a decent opportunity to flourish and be recognized for the inherent dignity that they hold, and for their destinies not to be determined by their zip code, race, class, gender, sexuality, etc.
Or even, that for sure. And then it even makes me think back to what you talked about with the guaranteed basic income, like what you can create or what you can produce, and that, like, determining your worth and kind of this meritocracy that I mean, I feel like is only getting highlighted or heightened even more in our current state of things. But if I love this question. If there was a guaranteed basic income and it was enough to, I know Austin's a very expensive city, but like if it was enough to make it by with a guaranteed basic income, what would you be doing?
Well, if I had guaranteed basic income, I think it would really like just alleviate like pressure, honestly. It could provide like a stronger baseline for me and a number of folks, right? And more breathing room to operate. I think for those of us who grew up like without a lot of money, sometimes you live through this lens of scarcity, right, and survival,
Yep.
right, and you make your decisions based off what you perceive would be greatest for your survival. And guaranteed basic income can help free people from that and make decisions based on their passions and interests and desires to create a better world, to be, better versions of themselves in the world, if that's what they wish. It's just creating breathing room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what so many of us need. I think, we live in a society, hyper commodification, extraction, you know, wage theft and so forth, and accumulation, in this hyper productivity, mindset that can come at the expense of our well-beings, of our health, our rest, and so forth. And I think guaranteed basic income can allow us to live more, holistically grounded lives where it's not only about work, but it's also, about the quality time that we can spend with family,
Right.
How much time we can devote to our passions and our interests, to recreation, and to our dreams, right? Like, I have a love for music. I used to record incessantly, with guaranteed basic income. Maybe I can lean into that passion that I have a little bit more, so.
That's what I've always wondered, was what kind of creativity would be unlocked, if people were able to really lean into their passions, because and this stems from sitting with a group of pastors with an art curator down in Miami who worked with young artists. And when I asked her the question of what do you tell them about like the finance part of being an artist, and she says, oh no, I tell them like, you don't create art as a living, because then you're creating art for somebody else and as a paycheck. You do work to make it by. You create art because that's your passion and what you feel called to do. And like, as pastors who like we're struggling with what do we do in the midst of institutions that just sometimes feel like leading institutions prevents us from actually being pastors, which feels really sad to say, but like that's how often a lot of the pastors I am in conversation with, that's how they feel. But it makes you wonder, like if we had this basic income, that like imagine the creativity, whether it was music or art or just there's so many. I mean, I would probably spend a lot more time outside. I would have a garden, I would have a garden. Like,
Yeah.
And it's not that I can't have a garden now, but I'm also like, when am I gonna have a garden? So yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a really great thing to just consider. It's such an opposite conversation of like, oh well, that's just freeloading. You're just looking to like handouts and freeloading. It's like, no, imagine the creativity that would be sparked and the beauty that would be brought into this world simply by not having to just think, how am I going to make my bills next month? Whew, that's flourishing. That sounds like flourishing to me, right?
Amen.
Okay, as we wind here, I'd love to know, just again, people getting a sense of who Rudy is beyond the bio on the page. What are some things you're consuming media wise lately? Whether that's books or TV shows or podcasts or whatever the case may be. What's something you're really into lately?
I've been reading this book, How to Lose the Hounds, about maroon geographies and policing. It's actually based in my home area, Montgomery County, Maryland.
Wow.
About Black communities in the wake of emancipation, even during the period of anti-Black chattel slavery, who, escaped.
Yeah.
Right? And they liberated themselves. And the author, Celeste Winston, talks about this as flight, Black flight. And these maroon communities set up across different areas of Montgomery County that were really autonomous and were even in places that police wouldn't even dare to go.
Wow.
Because some of these places were in like really foresty areas, areas that some might think are conducive to people living there. But these maroon communities really made it happen. And Celeste Winston is using these communities as example to show like how we can build alternative worlds, right? And in this case, alternative worlds to institutions of, punishment, right? Carcerality, that contain and control and surveil these Black communities today, showing how these maroon communities, in some ways, liberated themselves from those realities.
That's awesome.
And there's a number of stuff I'm trying to read right now. In podcasts, Bomani Jones, The Right Time with Bomani Jones, one of my favorite sport personalities. He provides some, insightful social commentary to go along with, what's happening in the sports world today. So I recommend that. Gosh.
Well, since you mentioned sports, Redskins fan, I assume?
Commanders,
oh my gosh, I said Redskins. Yeah. Oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? There's that ingrained for years and years and years. The Commanders, yeah. Thank you for that correction.
Commanders
fan?
Yeah, I'm a fan of. Okay. It's finally looking good.
Right, Jaden Daniels, man. Good stuff.
I see the Super Bowl pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, we could go down that road for a while here. Like living in Dallas, where I am, like everyone's just losing their minds because the Cowboys are so terrible, and like, who would have thought the Commanders would take such a commanding lead of the NFC?
I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Good stuff, dude. Well, okay, last question. So I love this idea of flourishing and this stuff. So what have you been doing lately that's bringing you joy, or what do you do to have fun?
Love
Since
running.
You're exploring a new city. Running, you said?
Yeah. Shout out to one of our colleagues, Mercedes, who runs We Outside, me and my partner.
Yep.
I've had a good time going to that. We love to run. So I really want to get back into playing basketball. So something I'm not currently doing, but I really want to, see what these leagues in Austin are about. Get some running.
I love that.
Yeah, I love enjoying green spaces, going to the park. I love going to, cafes, reading, working, musical spaces. We went to the Usher concert a few weeks back. That was cool. Sporting events, jazz. Went to this really nice spot downtown. Played some good house music, jazz, R&B. Love doing stuff like that. Went to a concert with a band that performed these, Selena songs, and they really, they honored her, through the way that they performed. That was lovely.
That's good stuff, man. Well, y'all, you can find Rudy again on the website 787collective.org. Always, you can email him. You can email. You connect with him via email, maybe.
Logan at Austin Seminary.edu.
No, Rudy, we're thrilled to have you on staff here with us and to be able to partner with you and do work with you. And so we do hope that you'll reach out to Rudy if you're a young adult here in the Austin area, or just young adults in general, curious about the various ministry aspects Rudy talked about. Definitely reach out to him and connect. And we're always looking to build a broader network through the 787 Collective. So that's our hope.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice,
the premier podcast of the 787 Collective.
Click the link in our show notes to connect with us and learn how you can be the lucky recipient of free 787 Collective swag.
And don't forget, when you rate and review us, you're tricking the algorithm for the common good.